Something revealing is happening inside the Republican Party right now, and it's not what the political coverage is showing you. While media focuses on approval ratings and polling numbers, the real story is unfolding in congressional hallways and on cable news programs where Republican senators are doing something they haven't done in years. They're criticizing Trump administration officials by name, on camera, without hedging. This isn't about policy disagreements or messaging disputes. This is about Republican elected officials calculating that the cost of silence has become higher than the cost of speaking out. And that calculation tells you more about where American politics is heading than any poll. Stay with me because what I'm about to show you reveals a structural fracture that will shape the 2026 elections and beyond. Let me start with what happened this week because the specific words matter. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, a reliable conservative vote, went on camera and delivered an assessment of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem that would have been unthinkable 12 months ago. He said she thought FEMA should be eliminated. He said when her FEMA director disagreed, she fired him within 24 hours. He called her thought processes amateurish. He said it was unacceptable for someone in a cabinet-level position. Then he turned to Stephen Miller, the senior advisor who has shaped much of the administration's immigration policy. He said Miller's comments about Greenland put the president in a difficult circumstance. He said Miller publicly called someone a terrorist before talking to anyone on the ground, and that turned out to be clearly wrong. His exact words, Stephen Miller never fails to live up to my expectations of incompetence. When asked if Miller should be fired, Tillis said if he were president, neither Noem nor Miller would be in Washington right now. This is a sitting Republican senator publicly calling for the removal of two senior administration officials on television with his name attached. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska went further. When asked if she had faith in Kristi Noem as DHS Secretary, she said she has lost confidence in her. When asked about other issues beyond the immediate controversy, she said there are other issues. She said she supported Noem's nomination and had great hopes. Now she's disappointed. Two Republican senators, two public statements of no confidence, both directed at officials who were supposed to be executing the administration's signature priorities. And here's what the coverage misses. This isn't really about Noem or Miller. This is about permission structures. Let me explain what that means because it's the key to understanding everything that happens next. In political parties, criticism flows through invisible channels. Junior members watch senior members. Senators in competitive states watch senators in safe states. Everyone watches leadership. When a senator like Tillis, who represents a swing state and needs Trump supporters to win re-election, goes on camera and calls administration officials incompetent, he's not just expressing an opinion. He's creating permission for others to do the same. When Murkowski, who has more independence due to Alaska's unique electoral dynamics, publicly withdraws confidence, she's establishing that such statements won't result in immediate political destruction. These statements function as signals. They tell other Republicans the cost of criticism has decreased. The protection that once surrounded administration officials has weakened. And once that permission structure cracks, criticism tends to cascade. Now, let me show you the numbers that explain why this is happening. Now, the administration's approval rating has reached negative 38 points in recent polling. That means 38% more Americans disapprove than approve. For context, that's among the worst ratings recorded for any modern president at this point in a term. But raw approval numbers don't drive senator behavior. Electoral math does. In 2026, Republicans are defending Senate seats in states Biden won in 2020. They're defending seats in states with significant suburban populations that have shown volatility on Trump-related candidates. They're watching special election results that suggest enthusiasm gaps. Senators facing re-election are making calculations. Is attachment to this administration an asset or a liability in my specific state? Are the voters I need to win independence who might be alienated by administration controversies? Can I create enough distance to survive without creating so much distance that I lose primary support? Tillis and Murkowski aren't speaking randomly. They're speaking because their calculations have shifted. The political cost of loyalty now exceeds the political cost of criticism for their specific electoral situations. And when that calculation shifts for some senators, it begins shifting for others. This is what party fractures look like in their early stages. Not dramatic breaks or formal schisms, quiet recalculations that accumulate until the structure changes. Now let me show you the strategic dimension because this connects to something larger than individual Senate races. The criticism from Tillis and Murkowski focused on specific failures. Noem's handling of FEMA, Miller's premature public statements, the Greenland controversy, immigration enforcement that has generated negative coverage. But the underlying message is more significant. The administration is taking an issue Republicans should own, border security and immigration, and destroying it through incompetence. That's Tillis's exact framing. He said this is an issue that got the president elected, and the administration has destroyed it for Republicans. That's not a policy critique. That's an electoral critique. He's saying the administration is making it harder for Republicans to win on an issue that should be their strongest. When senators start framing criticism in electoral terms, they're not trying to improve the administration's performance. They're trying to create distance before voters make connections they can't undo. This reveals a fundamental tension within the party. The administration's approach generates intense support from the base, but creates vulnerabilities with the broader electorate needed to win competitive races. Senators in safe states can ignore that tension. Senators in competitive states cannot. And as we approach 2026, more senators will face that competitive dynamic. The map forces engagement with voters who aren't part of the base, and those voters are increasingly skeptical of administration conduct. Now, let me show you what's happening on the other side, because the Democratic response reveals their strategic calculation. Democrats are watching the Republican fracture and identifying an opportunity. They see senators creating distance from the administration. They see approval numbers creating headwinds. They see specific controversies generating sustained negative coverage. Their strategic response has two components. First, they're amplifying the Republican criticism. When Tillis calls Miller incompetent, Democrats ensure that clip circulates. When Murkowski withdraws confidence, Democrats highlight the bipartisan nature of concern. They're using Republican voices to validate Democratic arguments. Second, they're positioning alternatives. In California, where the political dynamics are different, Democrats are testing messages about what governance could look like with different priorities. Tommy Steyer, the billionaire activist running for California governor, represents one version of that alternative positioning. His campaign focuses on tax restructuring, housing affordability, and utility reform. The specific policies matter less than the framing. He's positioning himself as a wealthy person who believes wealthy people should pay more. He's attacking corporate monopolies, particularly in energy. He's proposing rent control and housing construction acceleration. Whether these policies would work as designed is debatable. What's strategically significant is the contrast being drawn. While the national Republican brand deals with competence questions, California Democrats are presenting detailed policy alternatives. That contrast is intentional. Democrats believe voters exhausted by controversy will be receptive to candidates offering specific plans rather than dramatic conflict. The Steyer campaign also reveals something about Democratic donor dynamics. He's self-funding, which insulates him from the donor pressures affecting other candidates. He's explicitly criticizing other billionaires and corporate leaders for failing to speak against administration policies. His framing, if you won't stand up for democracy and rule of law, you forfeit your right to be considered a leader. You only get to talk about business and money because that's all you care about. That message is designed for a specific audience, voters who feel abandoned by institutions they expected to provide moral leadership. Voters frustrated that corporate America has largely accommodated rather than resisted administration policies they find objectionable. Whether that message wins a California primary depends on factors specific to that race. But the strategic choice to make that message central reveals Democratic assumptions about voter sentiment. Now, let me show you what this means for you personally. Because these political dynamics have tangible consequences, the competence questions being raised by Republican senators aren't abstract governance concerns. They affect how agencies function. They affect whether emergency response works when disasters hit. They affect whether immigration enforcement operates within legal boundaries or creates liability exposure for communities. When a senator says the FEMA director was fired for disagreeing with the secretary, that suggests personnel decisions are driven by loyalty rather than expertise. When that pattern repeats across agencies, institutional knowledge degrades, response capacity diminishes. You experience this as slower disaster response, as agencies that can't answer questions, as government services that don't function as expected. The economic policies being debated in California have direct implications for residents there and indirect implications for everyone else. If California implements significant tax restructuring, it creates a natural experiment other states will study. If utility reforms reduce energy costs, other states will consider similar approaches. If housing acceleration succeeds, it provides a model for the national housing shortage. State-level policy innovation matters because federal gridlock has made national solutions difficult. States become laboratories, and successful experiments spread. The electoral outcomes in 2026 will determine the balance of power in Congress. That balance affects everything from budget priorities to oversight intensity to judicial confirmations. Your daily life is shaped by decisions made by whoever holds those majorities and the permission structures being established now. The calculations senators are making about what criticism is acceptable will determine what kind of Republican Party emerges from this period. A party that successfully distances from controversies might maintain electoral competitiveness while moderating some positions. A party that doubles down might energize its base while alienating persuadable voters. The choice being made now shapes options available later. Now, let me tell you what to watch in the coming months because the signals will reveal which direction this fracture develops. First, watch for additional Republican senators criticizing administration officials by name. Each new voice expands the permission structure. Pay attention to which senators speak and which remain silent. The pattern reveals electoral calculations across different state types. Second, watch primary challenges. If Republican senators who criticize face primary opponents and those opponents receive administration support or base enthusiasm, it signals that criticism carries costs. If critics don't face serious primary challenges, it signals the permission structure is solidifying. Third, watch polling in competitive Senate states. Not just approval ratings, but issue-specific polling. If voters in those states express concern about the same issues senators are raising, the electoral calculation becomes clearer. Senators follow voters more than they lead them. Fourth, watch donor behavior. Money flows toward candidates donors believe can win. If Republican donors start directing funds away from candidates closely tied to administration controversies, it accelerates the distancing dynamic. Money is the leading indicator of elite confidence. Fifth, watch state-level Democratic positioning. If candidates like Steyer succeed with messages emphasizing contrast and specific alternatives, it provides a template for 2026 federal races. If they fail, Democrats will adjust their approach. The next 12 months will determine whether the fractures visible today widen into structural breaks or heal into temporary disagreements. Here's what we're actually witnessing: a political party processing the tension between its base and its broader electoral needs. That tension exists in every party, but it becomes acute when the gap between base enthusiasm and general election viability widens. Republican senators like Tillis and Murkowski are the early indicators. They're positioned where the tension is most acute, needing both base support and crossover appeal. Their public statements reveal that they've concluded the current positioning creates more risk than benefit. Whether other senators reach the same conclusion depends on factors specific to their states and their political calculations. But the permission structure now exists. The first critique has been made. Others may follow if they choose to. How Democrats respond will determine whether they're able to take advantage of Republican fractures or whether their own internal strains create similar weaknesses. And as always, voters will have the final say on which calculations proved right. Change doesn't come from single dramatic moments. It comes from the slow accumulation of small choices. Senators deciding whether to speak up or stay quiet, donors choosing where to send their money, voters deciding what they're willing to accept. Those choices are being made right now, and they'll shape what paths are still open in 2026 and beyond. Pay attention to which senators are speaking and which ones aren't. That pattern tells you far more than any poll about where things are headed. Political parties don't announce when they're cracking. They show it through shifts in behavior, one decision at a time.